How are you guys? Welcome back to Wargaming China, the channel for anybody who is interested in wargaming the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression from 1931 to 1945, armchair historians, modelers and fans of toy soldiers. So what we're looking at here is the Guangdong Armoured Formation of it consisted of about 30 vehicles with Vickers light amphibious tanks and Shanghai and one-part dockyard armoured cars. Now what I'm going to talk about today is the Vickers amphibious light tank. The armoured cars are just there as a teaser for future episodes, but of course I'd like to see some more subscribers before I do that episode. So let's get back to the Vickers 6-tonners. The Vickers light amphibious tanks. Okay, so China received approximately 30 of the Vickers Carden Loyd Type 31 amphibious tanks, and it appears that about a dozen of these went to Guangdong and the others 18 or so went to serve in the government forces in the 2nd Armoured Company of the 1st Tank Battalion. Now, a platoon of tanks in Chinese service, in government service, is 5 vehicles, and a company is 3 platoons, 15 Vickers light tanks, and 1 Vickers light tank as the HQ. So 16 vehicles in what was called the Dragon Company of the 1st Tank Battalion of the Chinese Central Government's Army, of the National Revolutionary Army. Now, this tank is very much maligned by historians, the Vickers amphibious tank, and the reason for it is because it's put it's considered as a World War II tank. Well, because this tank was developed and started production in 1931, I wouldn't really consider it a World War II tank. And although it did win some export orders, it never served with the British Army. Now, if you look at books and a few documentaries, you may notice that what I'm going to tell you will differ from them, because a lot of documentaries are based on a model of the Vickers light tank that was produced in 1939, and its specs are different to the original Type 31s. So bear with me with that, and if you don't agree with anything I say, it's because you probably read about the later type. And the later type produced in 1939, the stats and history of it is often confused, or seems to be. Could be me, because I'm just a terrible communicator. But okay, Vickers Carden Loyd Type 31. Maligned in history because, you know, its 11mm armour is not very much. Its top speed of 40 miles per hour, you know, it's not bad. It does 4.5 miles an hour on the water. But it's that on the water that makes this a revolutionary design. This is the first armoured vehicle in history that the crew do not have to get out of the vehicle to prepare it to cross water. Now, if we look at the Shermans, the DD tanks, it took the crew quite a while to put those screens up. Not very long for them to take them down, but they had to get out of the vehicle to do so. Now, with the Vickers Carden Loyd weighing just over 3 tons, it really does not look like a pleasant ride when you see this crossing water. If you ever see film footage of this crossing water, it does not look like a pleasant experience for the crew. However, as I said, it could enter the water without the crew having to prepare it from outside of the vehicle, which was a win-win. Now, the reason that this tank should be remembered in Chinese service is this tank delivered a great victory to the Chinese forces at the Battle of Taizhuang in between late March and early April 1938, when these tanks succeeded in crossing the Grand Canal and attacking the Japanese positions from the flank, and that was the final straw for the Japanese. After so much pressure on their rear, they began their retreat, and that was one of the first major victories of the Chinese forces against the Japanese, and it was delivered by the Vickers light tank. So yes, the Vickers light tank may not have achieved much in Europe or throughout the rest of the world, but it certainly had a contributing factor during the fighting of the war of resistance against Japanese aggression from 1931 to 1945. Now, the very interesting thing about this Vickers light tank is the engine. It was supplied with a Meadows engine. Now, Meadows we should all be familiar with, because when I started, I was only vaguely familiar with Meadows. So when I started to read into it and did a few searches, I discovered that they were actually quite a very distinguished engine company, and they had a whole diverse line of what they manufactured, from racing car engines to tractor engines, and indeed, if you look at the names that they made motors for, there are some big names indeed: Fraser Nash, Lagonda, Guy, Jaguar, Cummins, all of them prestigious names in their time. Another name was Lagonda, who were making fine motor racing boats. Now, during World War II, Meadows continued in production and produced engines for the Tetrarch light tank, the Covenanter light tank, a series of cruiser tanks, and obviously they were still making engines for Guy, and they were even had a production line for Rolls-Royce Meteor engines that were to be placed in the Cromwell and Comet tanks. So Meadows we should all be more familiar with it now, because it certainly did contribute to the victory over Japan and Germany. So, as I said, in government service, the Vickers light tanks were known as Dragon Company, and in the Guangdong forces, there's no specific mention of how the Guangdong armoured formations were broken up, and indeed, I don't know for certain if the tanks that made the attack at Taizhuang, taking the Japanese in the rear, belonged to the provincial government of Guangdong, or were indeed the Dragon Company vehicles. If anybody does know that or can confirm it, I'd love to hear from them. Okay, so there we go. The Vickers amphibious light tank had... other speculation is that the armament was a Vickers gun in 303. We must remember the Vickers gun could be made in any caliber you wanted, basically, so it could even be 6.5. I even found some suggestions that it was a .50 Vickers, not the D, but the other version, the shorter barrel version, which went into British armoured vehicles. However, I doubt that. It's 11mm of armour. Doesn't sound very much, but for me, I've always admired this tank for another reason. Its flotation is achieved by this, on the side is a big long plank, balsa plank, and it's sheeted in armoured plate, and this is what provides the buoyancy for the tank entering the water, and the rear propeller at the rear drives the tank. Now, I've worked in demolition for a long time, and I do know how timbers behave, and it's actually always been my belief that the balsa wood, being the buoyancy, the means that the tank gets its buoyancy from, could in fact help with its anti-armor capability, because balsa wood is very dense wood, and it doesn't splinter or shatter, it just absorbs. So it would be interesting. Well, that's just conjecture, but it's what I've always believed. So even though it had 11 millimeters of armour, it still was quite well armed, considering that in 1931 not many nations had dedicated anti-tank guns, and it has quite a low silhouette. There's no talk of it being unreliable. So there you go, in Chinese service from say 1935 to the end of the war. They didn't take part in the Chinese Expeditionary Force that entered Burma. However, they did see combat, as I said, at Taizhuang, and many historians don't take any note of that, or haven't mentioned it when they talk about China and this tank. But you know, that's why I do this channel, so we can bring up things that other people don't bring up. And as I said, my big question is, were these Dragon tanks that crossed at Taizhuang, or were they Guangdong tanks? Because there were some Guangxi forces present, and we could have been seconded to them. So there we go. It also served in Thailand. The Russians bought a few and developed their own series of amphibious tanks with them, and the Poles had a good look at it and thought, oh, we won't buy one, but we will certainly try and make our own version, and they did. And as I said, served in the war of resistance against Japanese aggression from 1931 to 1945, along with the Chinese soldier who fought the Japanese army with the least for the longest. Okay guys, thanks.